What starts as distance can turn into damage. What begins as space can end in silence, and silence that can become the slow death of love. If you've ever felt like you're begging for breadcrumbs in a relationship, hanging on to moments instead of memories, then you're not crazy. You're in the middle of emotional neglect disguised as just needing space. Let's rip the mask off avoidant behavior right here, right now. Avoidant behavior can often appear harmless, even respectful at first glance. A partner may say they just need space, some alone time, or moments to recharge, and that's understandable. We all require a degree of solitude and independence to maintain our sense of self. But what many people fail to recognize is that avoidance isn't always benign. It's not always about healthy boundaries. Sometimes it's the early warning sign of emotional disconnection that, if left unaddressed, will evolve into something far more painful: neglect. When avoidance becomes a pattern, it stops being about self-care and starts becoming a wall, a deliberate or unconscious barrier to intimacy. It becomes a defense mechanism where one partner pulls away. Not just physically, but emotionally. They stop communicating openly. They respond with surface-level answers. They show no real curiosity about your inner world. The once deep conversations are now replaced with silence, awkward pauses, or vague distractions. You can feel them drifting, but when you reach out, they retreat further, claiming they're just not in the mood, stressed, or tired. And this behavior repeats over and over again. In the beginning, you may rationalize it. You tell yourself they're just wired differently. You convince yourself that maybe you're asking for too much. Maybe if you stop needing so much connection, they'll come closer. But slowly, something inside you starts to shift. You begin to feel more like an outsider in your own relationship. The connection that once lit you up now feels like a dimming flame that only you are trying to keep alive. What's dangerous is that avoidant behavior often doesn't look cruel. It looks quiet, calm, reasonable, but that's what makes it so damaging. Because while you're not being yelled at, you're not being held either. You're not being criticized, but you're also not being nurtured. It's a void. Not of violence, but of presence, the kind of absence that confuses you because everything on the surface looks fine. They're still around, they're still sharing a home, a bed, maybe even a life, but they're no longer truly with you. This is the moment avoidant behavior crosses the line. It's no longer about needing time to reflect or decompress. It's about consistently denying emotional closeness, and whether intentional or not, this pattern sends a clear message: I will not meet you where you are. I will not carry your heart with mine, and that message can leave a deep emotional wound in anyone who is still trying to reach for love in a space that no longer welcomes it. What happens after avoidance becomes a pattern is something most people don't see coming: emotional starvation. It doesn't show up with flashing warning signs or sudden changes. It creeps in slowly, like a quiet erosion of connection. One moment you're expressing your needs, your feelings, your hopes for deeper connection, and the next you're second guessing everything. You start to wonder if your needs are valid. You begin shrinking your voice, softening your presence, silencing your emotions. Not because you've changed, but because their response or lack of it has taught you that expression leads to rejection. In this space, you learn how to survive on crumbs. You celebrate the rare text reply, the occasional compliment, or the once in a blue moon deep conversation. These rare moments of emotional availability feel like wins, like progress, because you're so used to the cold that even a flicker of warmth feels like fire. But make no mistake, this is not love thriving. This is you adjusting to emotional neglect. The body keeps the score. Your nervous system begins to internalize that emotional closeness is unpredictable, unsafe, or too costly to ask for. So you adjust. You stop sharing your deeper thoughts. You don't mention when something hurt. You avoid bringing up your emotional needs out of fear that it will be dismissed, or worse, cause them to pull away even further. You become hyper-attuned to their moods, constantly walking the tightrope between not wanting to push them and desperately needing something. Anything to feel emotionally secure again. And still, you keep trying. You over-explain, over-apologize, over-function. You give more than you get, hoping that your consistency will eventually melt their distance, but it never does. Instead, you end up depleted, not just emotionally, but mentally, spiritually, because neglect doesn't happen all at once. It's the slow buildup of unanswered messages, unmet needs, and unacknowledged pain. And the worst part convinces you that you're the one who's broken, that if you could just be a little less sensitive, a little more patient, a little more low maintenance, maybe then they would open up. But what's really happening is that you're being emotionally malnourished while pretending you're fine. You're pretending you're okay with being on empty. You're pretending that love can survive in a space where one person constantly shows up while the other hides behind emotional walls. That is not a sustainable pattern. It's a slow drift into emotional loneliness, even when you're lying side by side. One of the most heartbreaking parts of being in a relationship with an avoidant partner is the illusion that it's just temporary. You keep telling yourself they just need time. You convince yourself that they're healing, that they're working through something, that one day when life calms down, they're less stressed. When they finally feel safe, they'll open up. You hold on to that hope like it's oxygen, because the moments when they do show affection, when they do soften, feel like proof that the emotional connection still exists. You believe that if you can just be patient enough, love them hard enough, or stay calm long enough, they'll eventually meet you where you are. But the reality is often more painful. When avoidant behavior turns into a lifestyle, not a phase, it becomes a one-sided emotional investment. You're the one doing the work, emotionally stretching yourself, emotionally bending yourself, while they stay in their comfort zone, and that comfort zone is distance, silence, minimal engagement. They may not even realize it, but their entire relational strategy is about managing their own emotions, not creating mutual connection. They're not reaching for you. They're simply maintaining the level of closeness they feel they can handle. But what about what you need? Time keeps passing. You keep waiting. Birthdays, holidays, quiet Sunday mornings. They all blur together as you continue to hope for a breakthrough that never comes. You begin to notice emotional effort isn't mutual. You initiate the deep talks. You reach out when things feel distant. You express your concerns. You open your heart again and again, despite how many times it's been left hanging in silence. But how long can one person hold a relationship together on hope alone? Eventually, the illusion becomes a prison. You're stuck between the version of them you hope they'll become and the reality of who they're showing up as. That gap begins to break you down. You start internalizing their lack of emotional responsiveness as a reflection of your own worth. You start thinking that maybe if you were more lovable, more low maintenance, more emotionally chill, they would finally come around. But that's not how healthy love works. When someone keeps choosing distance while you keep choosing connection, it's not a phase, it's a pattern, and patterns don't change with more patience. They change when both people are willing to do the work. If they're not showing up now, what makes you believe they will someday magically transform? Waiting is not love. Hoping in silence is not connection. And time alone does not heal a relationship when only one heart is still beating for two. Avoidant partners often carry a belief system that frames their emotional distance as independence. They may say things like, "I don't like being too dependent on anyone," or "I just need my space." And while those words sound mature and self-aware, they can be used as shields. Avoid the vulnerability that true connection demands. At first, you might admire their sense of autonomy. It can be attractive. Someone who doesn't need you too much, someone who seems self-sufficient, in control. But slowly, you begin to realize that their version of independence leaves no room for intimacy. What they call space often feels like dismissal. What they call strength feels more like stonewalling. Healthy independence supports a relationship. It doesn't isolate one partner within it. There's a difference between being independent and being emotionally unavailable. Real independence says, "I can stand on my own, but I choose to stand with you." Avoidant behavior, when left unchecked, says, "I will stand on my own, and you will learn to be okay with being kept at arm's length." It doesn't invite connection, it manages it. It doesn't deepen intimacy, it limits it. And over time, the person on the receiving end begins to question whether their presence is even wanted or just tolerated. You may start to feel guilty for wanting more closeness, more affection, more conversations that go beyond the surface. You wonder if your needs are too big, too emotional, too inconvenient. You try to adjust, dial yourself down, become more understanding. But the truth is, no one should ever have to minimize their emotional needs in order to make a relationship work. When someone uses independence as a way to escape emotional responsibility, it leaves their partner emotionally stranded. This emotional desertion can feel confusing because it doesn't always show up in obvious ways. They may still be physically present, still come home at night, still share meals with you, but emotionally, they're gone. And yet, when you bring it up, they might say you overreacting, being dramatic, or trying to force them into something they're not ready for. That response not only invalidates your emotional experience, it trains you to silence it. Eventually, you begin to carry the entire emotional load of the relationship. You try to balance your own unmet need while still being supportive of theirs. But one person cannot carry the emotional weight for two. Love is not about protecting someone's comfort while abandoning your own. And when independence turns into emotional isolation, it's not strength. It's avoidance wearing a respectable disguise. When you're in a relationship with someone who consistently withdraws emotionally, over time, the focus slowly shifts away from their behavior and turns inward, toward you. In the beginning, you might clearly see that they're distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable. You may recognize that they're not meeting your needs, but as the dynamic continues, something begins to change. You stop looking at what they're doing and start questioning what you're doing wrong. This is the slow psychological transformation that neglect causes. It turns your longing for connection into self-blame. You begin to wonder if you're too sensitive, too emotional, too needy. You second guess whether you should have spoken up when something hurt. You downplay your pain, thinking maybe it wasn't a big deal. You convince yourself to wait it out, to be more understanding, to ask for less. Because every time you express a need, you're either met with silence, resistance, or withdrawal. Over time, their detachment becomes your emotional training ground. You learn to suppress your desires just to avoid feeling like a burden. You don't stop feeling, you just stop showing it. You start managing the relationship all by yourself. You initiate conversations, you plan the moments, you bridge every emotional gap. And when those efforts go unnoticed or unreciprocated, you don't get angry, you try harder. You begin to think that if you can just be more patient, more loving, more agreeable, you'll finally reach them. But what you don't see is that in this silent chase, you are slowly losing pieces of yourself, the vibrant, expressive version of you, the one who was once open-hearted and emotionally available, begins to shrink into someone quieter, more cautious, always calculating whether their reaction is worth the risk of your honesty. And yet, deep down, you know something is off. You feel the loneliness. You feel the tension in your chest after every emotional dismissal. You feel the weight of unspoken conversations that never find a place to land. But instead of acknowledging that you are being emotionally neglected, you start to believe that maybe your love style is the problem, that maybe you just love too much. What's really happening is that you're internalizing someone else's inability to connect as your personal defect. Their emotional unavailability becomes your emotional invisibility, and the longer this continues, the more your sense of self begins to erode, not because of loud rejection, but because of the quiet decay of consistent unmet needs. You're not being too much. You're just in a space where too little has become normal. At some point in the cycle of emotional neglect, there comes a breaking point, not always loud or dramatic, but deeply personal and powerful. It's the moment you stop asking, "How can I fix this?" and start asking, "What is this doing to me?" That shift is where your power begins to return. For so long, you've been pouring love into someone who gives just enough to keep you hopeful, but not enough to make you feel secure. You've been walking through a desert, surviving on emotional droplets, convincing yourself that someday floodgates will open. But what if they never do? What if you've been holding on to potential instead of truth? This realization doesn't come easily. It comes after countless nights of waiting for a reply, after trying to decode their coldness, after suppressing your pain just to maintain the peace. It comes when you look in the mirror and realize you've become a version of yourself you no longer recognize. Quieter, smaller, more cautious. You realize that love isn't supposed to make you feel like you're always auditioning for someone's affection. Love doesn't make you beg for connection. Love doesn't keep you guessing. The most powerful act of self-respect is choosing to stop negotiating with someone's limitations, to stop shrinking your emotions just to protect their comfort. When someone continuously shows you through their actions or inactions that they're unwilling to meet you emotionally, believe them. It's not your job to translate your love into a language they refuse to learn. It's not your job to stay patient while they make a habit out of being unavailable. Reclaiming your voice doesn't mean you have to scream or slam doors. It means you no longer silence yourself in the hope of preserving a connection that only survives through your silence. It means you stop assigning value to the rare moments when they show up and start asking why those moments are so rare in the first place. You begin to realize that your worth was never tied to their ability to love you properly. Your value is not dependent on their validation, nor is your identity defined by how hard you try to make it work. Letting go of someone who is emotionally unavailable isn't giving up, it's waking up. It's stepping out of a love that kept you waiting and walking into a life where your emotional needs are not only valid but non-negotiable. You don't need to keep proving yourself to someone who has proven time and time again that they are not willing to rise and meet you. When avoidance becomes a consistent behavior in a relationship, it no longer just creates distance. It creates damage. It quietly chips away at the foundation of emotional safety, turning what should be a space of intimacy into a place of loneliness. Over time, the avoidant partner's detachment evolves from occasional silence into chronic neglect. And what makes this even more painful is that emotional starvation it causes doesn't come with obvious signs. It's subtle, it's silent, but its impact runs deep. You find yourself overanalyzing, overfunctioning, and overcompensating, while your emotional needs go unnoticed, untouched, and unspoken. What started as space becomes a slow erasure of connection. You begin to carry the weight of the relationship on your own shoulders, shrinking yourself to fit into their emotional limitations. Your desire for closeness is repeatedly met with avoidance, and instead of confronting the imbalance, you begin to internalize it. You convince yourself that you're asking for too much when, in truth, you're just asking for the basics: presence, consistency, affection, communication. But with avoidant behavior turning into neglect, you're left in a constant state of emotional uncertainty, hoping they'll change, waiting for them to come closer, clinging to fleeting moments that give you just enough to stay, but never enough to feel fulfilled. This cycle is not love, it's survival, and survival is not what a relationship should feel like. Relationships are meant to be rooted in mutual support, where both people feel seen, heard, and emotionally held. When only one person is doing the emotional work, it creates an unhealthy dynamic where love becomes performance, where peace comes at the cost of suppression, and where yourself worth is tied to someone else's emotional availability. The longer you stay in this space, more it distorts your view of what you deserve. You stop recognizing how much you've dimmed your own light just to be tolerated in someone else's shadow. But the most powerful decision you can make is to reclaim your voice and remember your value. You are not too much. Your emotions are not a burden. Your desire for connection is not a weakness. It's human. And when someone repeatedly chooses emotional absence, no matter their reasons, you have every right to choose presence. Your own. Healing begins the moment you stop chasing potential and start honoring your truth. The moment you say, "This isn't enough," is the moment you open the door to something more. A love that shows up, a love that stays, a love that doesn't need to be begged for, because it already knows your worth. Thank you for spending your valuable time with this message. If this speech spoke to something you've been feeling deep inside, know this: you are not alone, and you are not too much. Your emotions matter, your needs are real, and you deserve a connection that doesn't make you question your worth. Remember, walking away from emotional neglect is not weakness, it's strength, it's self-love in action. If this video brought clarity or comfort to you, I encourage you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes healing begins with just one powerful truth, and you might be the reason someone else finds theirs. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your energy, and never settle for a love that doesn't make you feel alive. You deserve more, you always have. Thank you again for watching. Stay strong, stay grounded, and goodbye for now.